Thank you very much for the very interesting talk. I think a lot of information which you provided me is pretty interesting. And one thing is hard to comment on this issue, not on your talk, but in general on these issues. It's very politically loaded questions that we are dealing with. So, and one of the things which I wanted to ask you is a little bit off the this particular talk, but I want you to know that many of these changes in terms of information flows and the election fraud, various aspects of flawed process is sprouting or popping up or uncovered. I don't know which one it is correct. I would like to know how this kind of phenomenon is perceived in Europe. And I would also like to know is there any similar kind of tendency within Europe
it's a very,
or internationally?
Very, very good question. Clearly, when I have spoken in Japan in the past, I've spoken in India in the past, I've spoken all over Europe, invariably I get a question somewhat similar to yours about where do Americans get their information and how is it that this information seems to be so disparate? In other words, people on the right only get their information from Fox News, people on the left only get it from some liberal sources, and their worldview is totally different as a result. And I think that those questions, and I don't mean maybe your question, but many of those they're critical of the United States. They can't understand how this can be. And frankly, I am of an age when I was growing up, there were 3 television networks. They all presented the news in a fairly middle of the road approach. And so the nation developed a kind of relatively common view of reality. And yes, some people on the left complain, some people on the right complain, but for the most part, you could tune in any one of these television networks and get more or less the same news. The Pew Research Center has done a great deal of work on this, and you can't prove causation, but you can certainly prove correlation. That the people who rely on Fox News are much more likely to believe in fraud in this election, to believe that horrible things about Democratic candidates, Hillary Clinton in the past or Joe Biden today or whatever. And similarly, viewers that get their news from MSNBC or the New York Times or whatever are more likely to be critical of Trump and see the worst in Trump. What is quite interesting is that some of these news sources influence other things, such as if you get your news from conservative sources, or almost exclusively from conservative sources, you're much more likely to see the other party as a threat to the national welfare. And vice versa, if you only get your news from a liberal news source, you're likely to see the Republicans as a threat to the national welfare. And what has always struck me about that is, in democracies, parties and party adherents will differ. And that's part and parcel of democracy, and that's actually healthy for the democracy. But if you see the other party and the supporters of the other party as a threat to the national well-being, how do you compromise with them? I mean, that's one of the problems, I think. And I think that our viewers need to understand that even if Joe Biden is elected, his ability to actually get stuff done has been compromised greatly by this duality in news sources, this partisanship in politics. Now, Joe Biden is running saying, I did it in the past, I can do it in the future. And he may get a chance to test that proposition. But much of his career occurred in a different era in American politics. And whether you can go back to that cooperation between Republicans and Democrats in Congress, I just don't know. But if we can't, then we are a deeply divided country that, even if Donald Trump leaves office and is, out of the picture, you're still going to have 40-some% of the American public who vote for him and support more or less what he has advocated. And will some other Republican politician come forward in 4 years and say, I'm not going to be your crazy uncle who tweets from every morning and yells at people. I'm going to be more disciplined. I'm going to be more strategic, but I'm going to support all the kinds of things that he supported. And we don't know what would happen in that environment, but the partisanship suggests there would be strong support for that.
Thank you. I have following up another question, and I have one more question. So let me put it first. This question. This is a kind of extension of what you said, but I feel one of the reasons why people are so polarized between X and Y is, this is my observation, but it's a lot to do with the fact that the news became very personalized. You yourself can choose what you like to watch. Even your kids, like 15 years old kids or 10 years old kids, can decide what you want to watch. When your father's watching something else, your mother's watching something else. And especially if you put something like this into your ears, then you don't even have to listen to anybody. You yourself can be within your own realm and deal with all the news and information within yourself. And I think this is a huge problem we are all facing, not within the US, not within Europe, just even Japan, probably even China. Things are personalized. The news is personalized. And as a result, people lost the ground where you can adjust your opinion between maybe within the family members or within your friends. If everybody watching your device, you have very small chance of conversing or exchanging your ideas. And I think that's a kind of true state of this real world, if you might disagree. And if you would agree with this, I would like to know your view on how to fix this personalized information structure or the state of the world.
Look, I'll be cautious here because you and I are roughly the same age. So we grew up and came of age and formed our worldview in a different period, right? But I totally agree with you. I think, people walk down the street now with something plugged into their ear. Now, they may be listening to Shakespeare, but probably more likely they're listening to rap or or K-pop or something. And what has always struck me about that is when we are out walking, it's one of the few times in life when you can be alone with your own thoughts. But if you're constantly putting stuff into your ear, you aren't reflecting on your life. You aren't reflecting on the world. There's no introspection. That you're just filling yourself up with something that takes up the space. And you're right. I mean, we now have such individualized sources of information. We have, the ability to watch 100 different television channels, or God knows how many internet sources. And what it means is that you can arrange it so that the only information coming into you is information that you already agree with. It just amplifies your own, and there's not that kind of, not only are there not 3 television networks in the United States, but people have stopped reading newspapers. So, one of my, the sad things I find, I don't know if it's the case still yet in Japan, I used to love to go to bookstores. And what was interesting about bookstores is you'd walk down the aisle, maybe you're looking for one book, but you'd see another book on the shelf, and you never thought of buying that book, but you'd buy it because it looked interesting. Now I go on Amazon, I'm looking for a specific book, I buy that specific book, it's very efficient, but I'm not then exposed to those other sources of information which I might have learned from, but since I don't know they existed, I didn't ask for them. And I think, I don't know how to roll that back, because obviously there's great efficiencies in the internet system. When I first began my career, if I wanted to get a report from the Department of Agriculture, I had to go over and get it. Now, fortunately, I lived in Washington, so I could do that, or otherwise I'd have to write for it and they'd mail it to me. Now I just go online and I get it. It's very efficient. But there is this cost that I think we never fully appreciated. And, we can plead all we want to that people should, that I should watch Fox News, right? Even though I don't agree with Fox News. And I must admit I don't. But I'll never forget, there was a justice on the US Supreme Court named Scalia, who has died. He's a very conservative man, one of the most conservative in modern time. And I read an interview with him once where he said he did not read the New York Times because it gave him indigestion. And I thought, this is a man who's on the Supreme Court. He's one of 9 of the most powerful judges in the United States, or the world even, and he doesn't read the newspaper of record in the United States. And then I realized that there's a newspaper in Washington called the Washington Times, which is very conservative. It's owned by Reverend Moon. And I don't read it. So I was the same as Justice Scalia. I was limiting my input. And I do think that, we're all susceptible to that, unfortunately. And I think we probably can do more in schools to, in essence, give children the habit of looking at various news sources. Whether that would work or not, I'm not so sure.
Thank you. Well, the last question is totally different topic, which is the issue you talked about, the 42% or whatever, 43%.
Yeah.
And that is a rather amazingly concrete group of people within your country. And I would imagine that Americans have to learn how to deal with those group of people if you are outside of it. And if you're within that, you probably by themselves have to learn how to outreach the other side. And I think currently this particular thing was lacking. I was very impressed with your point that the President Trump is rather trying to expand his support group, appealing to the non-voters who might next time vote. And that's very interesting. And your position was very interesting. And I never thought of that. So it was a good point. But if you do that, the President Trump will increase his own support within his group. And Mr. Biden will try to increase and probably successfully increase his support in the United States. Now then it will become this status quo of 42% is not going to be changed whatsoever. And I think within American society, having so divided people whom you can't convince otherwise. I'm not just talking about 42%, but the rest of the currently 52%, probably 50% is not the concrete number for as a tight number as 42. Right. But I would like to know how your society could deal with this division, very tight, concrete divisions.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's interesting that I believe it was 2012, or maybe it was, 2012, I think. The Republican Party did a study looking at, oh no, I'm sorry, I'll take that back. It was in 1996, they did a study. They said, we've lost a second time to Bill Clinton. We have to expand the Republican Party. And we think that we could develop a message that would appeal to Hispanics. They're the rapidly growing portion of the population, and we think for social and cultural reasons, we could appeal to them. Maybe not economic reasons, but for social and cultural reasons. But they never really tried to do that. And certainly Trump attacked that group viciously in 2016, right? He called Mexicans rapists and murderers, etc. So I suspect if Trump loses, and let's assume just for the sake of argument, Trump not only loses, he loses big. You know, it's embarrassing. A lot of Republicans lose office as well. There will be a call to say, look, we've got to expand the base of the Republican Party. We can't expect to win if the only people who vote for us are lowly educated white men. But in the past, they thought of doing this, and then they decided they'd pursue a different strategy. The demographic divide of the United States is such that if they don't find a way to not only get more of the old Trump people to vote for them, you know, get them to vote for the first time, which is what Trump's strategy is right now. If they don't kind of grow the base in some traditional way, the party's going to be in real trouble. The Democrats face the same challenge in a way, in the sense that, as you say, if they win and they decide, well, we don't have to do anything more, we won. They will have won because some people who voted for Trump in 2016 switched back and voted Democratic in 2020. But those voters are obviously fairly malleable, very changeable. And if you want them to vote for you again in 2024 or 2028, you better do something. And you might want to think of ways to expand your own base, which means to reach into some of those lowly educated white males who now vote Republican, some of those evangelical whites who vote Republican. Are there ways to build bridges to those people? Because while the Republicans, if they lose, I think face a much bigger challenge than the Democrats if they lose, because in part, the Democrats do have this demography going for them, you know, a growing minority part of the population. They both really need to expand their base if the country is going to be governable, because it seems to me at the end of the day, that's your question, is that it's not just who wins the election, but can he build a sustainable governance strategy that enables him to do something, to accomplish something, lead the world, lead the nation. And that's going to be hard to do going forward in America if one of the two parties doesn't expand its own appeal beyond its solid base. And what's interesting is at least the Republicans had that debate in the past. And again, they chose to do something else. The Democrats, it seems to me, have to have the same debate. They can't just say, well, we're the natural party of Blacks and Hispanics and Asians and young people. Yeah, today you are, but maybe not tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stokes. Very interesting and insightful analysis. I have a kind of two questions. One is half of the population expect a crisis after the election day. So how long will it prolong, the process will prolong, or and how things turn out after the election days? I suppose the judicial branch of the government will play a critical role, but what will...
Yes, good question, very good question. I think we can expect that the counting of the mail-in votes in some states could take at least a week. Now, there may be states that don't matter, you know, where somebody is way ahead and so the votes don't matter, or the winner doesn't need their electoral votes from that state. But if there are court cases brought, charges of impropriety in the election process, and certainly the Democrats expect the Republicans to bring these cases based on what the president has threatened to do. We'll see what happens. But the Democrats may bring some cases against the Republicans if they think the Republicans are doing things. This could slow down the process as well, because the vote counting might have to stop for a while. The challenge is that the Constitution says that in early December, the Electoral College has to meet. And as you know, in our system, each state has a certain amount of electoral votes, and they meet now virtually, and they cast those votes based historically, in recent years at least, it has been whoever won a majority of the votes in that state gets all the electoral votes in that state. So it's a winner take all by state. The Constitution doesn't say that's the way it has to be. And so it's very vague about what might happen. But it's clear, based on what happened in 2000, when Gore and Bush were fighting over the counting of votes in Florida, the Supreme Court stepped in and said, you know, you have to have a resolution of this by a certain date in early December, because the Constitution says the Electoral College has to meet on that day. And so I don't think the uncertainty would extend beyond, I think it's February the 9th or 12th or something like that, December the 9th or 12th, something like that. So we would know early in December, but ultimately it may have to be decided by the Supreme Court as to whether individual states counted all the votes, whether there was fraud or malfeasance in the polls. And one of the reasons that President Trump wanted Amy Coney Barrett, this new Supreme Court justice, to be quickly approved, and she may be approved as early as the end of October, is that he wanted a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court in the hopes that they would then decide, if these cases ever get to the Supreme Court, that they would decide in his favor. So it's entirely possible the Supreme Court may have to make some decisions about these votes. As you remember, in the year 2000, the Supreme Court, in essence, said Florida had to stop counting the votes. And at that point, Bush was ahead. The vote counting stopped. Bush won the election. And the irony is that a subsequent counting of those votes after Bush was declared the winner suggested that Bush would have won anyway, but they never got to officially count all the votes. But there is the chance that some votes will not have been counted in the United States by the time that the Constitution says the vote counting has to stop. And because the Supreme Court in 2000 said that the counting has to stop by a certain date, this may become a problem in this election season.
Thank you very much. I have another question on the change of the behavior of voters in key swing states. You mentioned the Rust Belt states as well as Sun Belt states. And compared to 2016, can you see the change of the behaviors of core voters for each Trump and Biden?
Yes, the polling suggests there is a change in certain areas. We'll see, what happens on election day, certainly, but suburban white women seem to be moving towards Biden and away from Trump. Bear in mind that Donald Trump won a majority of the white female vote in 2016. He is significantly behind among white women today. And that is particularly the case in suburban areas around big cities, in some of these key states, in the suburbs of Philadelphia, the suburbs of Detroit. So he appears to have lost the support of those women, which he's got to make up someplace. He's got to find a replacement for those. The evangelical Protestant vote remains strong for him and has not changed. Trump is picking up a little bit more support this time than last time among Hispanics. Not much more, but some, which should trouble the Biden camp because they want a strong turnout for him among the Hispanics. And groups that aren't changing are groups like men and women with a college education or more. They're strongly supporting Biden. They strongly supported Clinton in 2016. And older people who strongly supported Trump in 2016, Trump is still getting about half of their votes, but he got much more of their vote in 2016. So there's been a movement among people who are 65 years of age or older toward Biden. So there's been some movement in some of these key states. We'll see what happens on election day. Certainly Florida, it'll be very interesting to watch how older people in Florida vote, because it's a state that has a very high average age, a lot of retirees in Florida. We'll see in some of these Midwestern states where white evangelical Protestantism is strong and Trump won, whether he loses a little bit of that support, although nationwide he doesn't seem to have lost much of their support. And an interesting development will be Arizona, because Arizona has, at the last time Arizona voted for a Democrat for president, I was a young man. And, but because it's becoming increasingly a suburban state, a fairly well-educated state, and increasingly has a large Hispanic population, it is now expected that Biden may win that. And if he does, it would be a movement of especially suburban white women, but probably some other groups that are moving in that direction as well. Does that help answer the question?
Thank you very much. Very helpful. Thank you very much.